What would you do if your friend set you up on a blind date with her sister, only to discover the woman waiting at the table was your boss? Ethan Walker had spent 3 years building a life with no surprises, work, home, his 10-year-old daughter, the same quiet routines that kept grief from finding new ways to hurt him. Then, on a rainy Friday night in Tacoma, he walked into a waterfront restaurant, found table 9, and stopped cold. Claire Bennett was sitting there, his regional director, the woman who signed his reviews. Neither of them moved for several seconds, and that awkward dinner would soon become tied to a buried tragedy, a dangerous secret at the harbor, and a choice that could change both of their lives. Stay with this story to the end. If you enjoy emotional second-chance stories, like the video and comment where you're watching from. The strange thing was, 3 days earlier, Ethan Walker had been certain none of this would happen. He had been standing beside a rain-darkened soccer field on the edge of Tacoma, with a paper cup of coffee cooling between his hands, watching his daughter chase a white ball through wet grass while gray clouds pressed low over the trees. Saturday mornings had become one of the safest parts of his life. There was the whistle from Coach Ramirez, the smell of mud and coffee, parents tucked beneath umbrellas, children shouting across the field with the kind of urgency only children could give to something that would not matter by lunchtime. Ethan liked things that repeated. He liked knowing where he would be. He liked knowing who would be there. He liked that Sophie always forgot one shin guard and remembered the other. He liked that Molly Bennett always brought too many orange slices and handed them out as if she personally believed vitamin C could decide a soccer game. Predictable did not mean boring to Ethan. Predictable meant nothing had gone wrong yet. Molly dropped into the folding chair beside him and pulled her hood back. She was carrying 2 coffees even though Ethan already had one. She looked at his cup, then at the one in her hand. "You already bought coffee?" "I did." She handed him hers anyway. "This one is better. How could you possibly know that I bought it from somewhere with a chalkboard menu? That is not evidence. It cost $6. That is evidence of a crime." Molly laughed and settled deeper into her chair. They had known each other for almost a year. Their daughters had been placed on the same team the previous fall. And after enough Saturday mornings, enough wet sidelines, enough conversations about cleats, school lunches, bad referees, and children who treated bedtime like a constitutional debate, friendship had arrived without either of them announcing it. Molly knew Ethan was raising Sophie alone. She knew he worked at the harbor. She knew he left home before sunrise most weekdays. She knew he rarely complained. She knew he could fix almost anything. And she knew that every time another parent mentioned dating, Ethan suddenly found something interesting to study on the soccer field. What she did not know was much about the life that had come before. Ethan had learned how to answer questions without really answering them. How long had he been single? A while. What happened to Sophie's mother? She passed away. Did he ever think about dating again? Not really. Each answer was true. None of them invited a second question. Molly had tried anyway, twice. Both times Ethan had refused before she finished describing the woman. That morning she waited until Sophie's team moved to the far end of the field. Then she folded her arms. "I have a sister." Ethan kept his eyes on the game. "No, you do not even know what I was going to say. You have tried this before, not with my sister. That makes it worse. She is smart." "No, she is funny when she remembers how." "Molly, she is beautiful." Ethan took a sip of coffee. "You are wasting excellent advertising on the wrong customer. She works too much." "That does not sound like advertising. You work too much." "That sounds like a personal attack." "You are both impossible." "Then why would you put us at the same table? Efficiency." Ethan finally looked at her. Molly smiled with the confidence of a woman who had been building toward this conversation all week. "One dinner. No, Friday. No, 7:30. Still no. Waterfront place near Ruston." He looked back toward the field. "Molly." Her voice softened. "You have been saying no for a year, Ethan." His jaw tightened slightly. She saw it. Most people would have backed off. Molly did not. "I am not saying you need to marry somebody. I am not even saying you need to like her. I am saying you could eat a meal across from another adult who does not ask you to cut the crust off anything." A whistle blew across the field. Sophie stole the ball from another player and sprinted down the sideline. Ethan stood halfway out of his chair without realizing it. "Go, Soph." Sophie sent the ball toward the goal. It missed by several feet. She threw both hands into the air as if the goal had moved at the last possible second. Ethan smiled. It was the easiest smile Molly ever saw on him. "That," Molly said quietly. Ethan sat again. "What? That face." He looked at her. "You have one face for Sophie and another one for everybody else. I have no idea what you are talking about." "Sure." She let the silence rest for a moment. Then Sophie came jogging toward the sideline during a break, cheeks pink from the cold ponytail coming loose. "Dad, water." Ethan handed her the bottle. Molly looked innocent, far too innocent. Sophie took 3 drinks and looked between them. "What are you talking about, nothing?" Ethan said. "A date," Molly said. Ethan turned. "Molly." Sophie lowered the bottle. "Your date, no yes," Molly said. Sophie stared at her father. Ethan felt trapped in a way no industrial accident report had ever managed. "Molly has a sister. Is she nice? I have never met her." Molly lifted one finger. "She is very nice." Sophie considered this. "Then you should go." Ethan blinked. "I thought you needed to get back on the field. You tell me to try things before I decide I hate them." Molly covered her mouth to hide a smile. Ethan looked at his daughter. "That is different. How it just is. That is not an answer." There it was. Rebecca used to say the same thing, exactly the same way. Not loudly, not angrily, just with that patient expression that made it clear Ethan was going to need a better argument. For one brief second, the soccer field seemed farther away. He saw Rebecca and Sophie's face so clearly that the ache arrived before he could stop it. Then Sophie pushed the water bottle back into his hand. "One dinner, Dad." Coach Ramirez called her name. Sophie ran back toward the field. Molly waited. Ethan stared at the wet grass. Finally he sighed. "One dinner." Molly clapped once. He pointed at her. "No picture." Her smile faded. "What? No last name? No background research? No weird dossier? If I am doing this, I am doing it without you turning it into an interview." Molly's smile returned. "That is actually perfect. Why does that make me nervous?" "No reason, Molly." She lifted both hands. "One dinner. Friday, 7:30. Ethan looked toward Sophie. His daughter was already back in the game. Fine. That night, Ethan stood alone in the kitchen of the small craftsman house he and Rebecca had bought 11 years earlier. The house had been too expensive then. Too quiet now. He packed Sophie's lunch for Monday, even though it was still Saturday. Turkey sandwich, apple slices, crackers in the small blue container. He wrote her name on a napkin, even though she was 10 and knew perfectly well which lunch belonged to her. Routine had a way of filling empty spaces. He checked the weather for the following morning, loaded the dishwasher, set the coffee maker, walked through the living room and turned off the lamps in the same order he always did. At the bottom of the stairs, he stopped beside a narrow shelf. A photograph sat there in a simple wooden frame. Rebecca was in the center. Wind had blown loose strands of dark hair across her face. She wore a white hard hat and a bright safety vest over a navy sweater. One arm was around Ethan, the other around Sophie, who had been 6 then and missing a front tooth. All 3 of them were laughing at something outside the frame. Ethan had forgotten what. That bothered him sometimes, not forgetting Rebecca. He could never imagine that, forgetting the small things, what they had been laughing about, what she had ordered the last time they ate at their favorite diner, which song had been playing in the truck the morning before the accident. Grief did not take everything at once. Sometimes it returned years later and collected details. Ethan touched the corner of the frame. Then he moved his hand away. Upstairs, Sophie called from her room. "Dad." "Yeah, did you put my red jersey in the dryer?" He looked toward the laundry room. "No, you said you would. I know, you forgot. I am allowed to forget one thing. That is not what you tell me." He smiled despite himself. "I am putting it in now." "Thank you." He walked back towards the laundry room. The photograph remained behind him, catching the yellow light from the hallway. Across the city, Claire Bennett was still at work. The regional office sat above the terminal with wide windows looking over stacks of containers. Steel cranes, service roads, and the distant black water of Commencement Bay. At 8:12 on Saturday night, most of the building was empty. Claire sat at her desk with her shoes off beneath it, reading a cost report she had already read twice. Her phone buzzed. Molly. Claire considered letting it ring. She answered, "If this is about Mom's birthday, I ordered the flowers. It is not. If this is about Thanksgiving, I am not hosting. It is March. I am preparing early. You are going on a date." Claire leaned back in her chair. "No, Friday, no, 7:30. Molly, I found someone. That sentence makes me feel like you picked up a stray dog. He is better house-trained." Claire looked out the window. A gantry crane moved slowly against the dark sky. "Who is he?" "His name is Ethan." Claire's eyes remained on the terminal. The name caught somewhere inside her. She did not understand why at first. Then she did. Ethan Walker. Operations Supervisor, Tacoma Terminal. Quiet, steady. The man who always arrived before his shift. The man who never spoke simply to hear himself speak. The man who once corrected a load distribution calculation during a meeting and then acted as if anyone in the room could have done the same thing. Claire had noticed him long before she allowed herself to admit she had noticed him. Still, Ethan was hardly an unusual name. Seattle and Tacoma were full of Ethans. She forced her voice to remain casual. "Ethan, what no last names?" Claire frowned. "You cannot be serious." He made the same rule. That made her sit straighter. "What do you mean he made the same rule? Nothing. I mean no last names, no pictures, no internet searches." Claire looked down at the report on her desk. "Why? Because normal people used to meet without performing background checks. Normal people also smoked on airplanes." Molly ignored that. "He has a daughter." Claire's expression changed. How old? 10? Something in her chest tightened again. Ethan Walker had a 10-year-old daughter. Sophie. Claire knew the name because Ethan had once asked to leave a safety meeting 12 minutes early for a school conference. She had remembered it for no professional reason at all. Claire stood and walked toward the window. "Where does he work?" "Number Molly. You agreed to no background questions." "I did not agree to anything." "You will." Claire watched headlights move between container stacks below. Part of her wanted to ask one more question, just enough to eliminate the possibility. Does he work at the harbor? Does he have a daughter named Sophie? Does he stand in the back of operations meetings with his arms folded? She did not ask, because if Molly said yes, Claire would cancel immediately. She would have to, and somewhere beneath all the reasons she should want that answer was one reason she did not. "I will have dinner," Claire said. Molly went quiet. "You will, one dinner. That was much easier than I expected. I can still change my mind." "No, you cannot." Claire ended the call before Molly could sound any more pleased with herself. She remained beside the window. Far below, the Tacoma terminal operated beneath white industrial lights. Her gaze moved almost automatically toward the operations yard. She could not see individual workers from that distance. Still, she looked. Claire had been regional director for 14 months. She was responsible for 3 terminals across western Washington, but Tacoma consumed more of her time than the others combined. That was the explanation she gave the board. Tacoma moved more containers. Tacoma had more equipment, more personnel, more maintenance problems, more room for small mistakes to become expensive ones. All true. But truth could be complete without being whole. There were days when Claire found reasons to walk through the yard herself. Days when an email would have been enough. Days when another manager could have handled the inspection. She always had an explanation. She never asked herself why those walks so often passed through Ethan Walker's section. At work on Monday morning, neither Ethan nor Claire gave any sign that the name of an unknown Friday night date was resting somewhere in the back of their minds. The operations briefing began at 6:45. Ethan stood near the rear of the room with a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. Claire stood at the front beside a whiteboard filled with departure times. Richard Hale sat at the conference table, one hand wrapped around a coffee mug. Claire looked down at her notes. "Berth 4. Ethan answered. "Unload finished at 5:52. 2 containers held for customs inspection. Truck queue is under 20 minutes. Crane 6. Maintenance cleared it overnight. Any open safety issues? Nothing above routine." Claire nodded. Good. Their eyes met. Only briefly. Then she moved to the next item. Richard watched her. He had been watching Claire for 14 months. Not because he admired her, because he had spent 6 years believing the regional director position would eventually be his. When the board selected Claire Bennett instead, Richard congratulated her in front of everyone. He even shook her hand. Later, behind closed doors, he told anyone who would listen that the Bennett name had done more work than Claire ever had. Claire knew. She had heard versions of it throughout her entire career. Her grandfather had owned shipping interests around Puget Sound. Her father had served on the boards of companies Claire deliberately avoided. She had earned an operations degree, started in scheduling, worked nights, managed labor disputes, took assignments no one else wanted. None of it stopped people from seeing her last name before they saw her work. So Claire became difficult to question. She arrived early, left late, read every report, remembered every number, never gave anyone a reason to call her careless, especially Richard. After the meeting, Ethan remained in the operations office while a younger supervisor named Caleb stared at a load sheet. Caleb scratched his head. These numbers cannot be right. Ethan glanced over. What are you looking at, distribution for the steel coils? Ethan took the page. His eyes moved down once. He picked up a pencil. You are treating these two as centered. They are centered. On the trailer, yes. Not relative to the axle group. Ethan changed 2 figures. Move this one forward 8 inches and recalculate. Caleb looked at the sheet, then at Ethan. How did you see that? That fast, Ethan handed the pencil back. Been around long enough. Frank Delgado was standing near the doorway. He had heard the exchange. His eyes stayed on Ethan for a second. Then he continued walking. Ethan noticed, said nothing. By Thursday evening, the shirt Ethan planned to wear to dinner was hanging from the bedroom door. Sophie stood in the hallway inspecting it with the seriousness of a tailor. That one, Ethan looked down at himself. What is wrong with it? Nothing. That sounded like something. It is just very dad. I am a dad. I know. What should I wear? Sophie shrugged. I am 10. You started this. I said go on a date. I did not say I could dress you. Ethan laughed. For a moment, Rebecca's photograph on the dresser entered the edge of his vision. His smile faded slightly. Sophie saw. She often saw more than he wanted. She stepped into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. You do not have to go if you do not want to. Ethan looked at her. 3 days earlier, she had pushed him toward it. Now she was giving him a way out. That somehow made leaving harder. He sat beside her. I said I would. You always say people can change their minds. They can. Then why are you going? Ethan thought about the question. Because Molly would never let him hear the end of it. Because Sophie had called him on his own advice. Because he had spent 3 years declining every invitation that did not fit neatly inside the walls of the life he had built. None of those felt like the complete answer. I think maybe I am tired of saying no before I know what I am saying no to. Sophie nodded as if that made sense. Then she pointed toward the shirt. Still not that one. Across Tacoma, Claire stood in front of her own closet longer than she wanted to admit. Work clothes were easy. Dark slacks, blazer, simple blouse, low heels. Everything in her closet had a purpose. Dinner with a stranger did not. She finally chose a dark green dress she had bought for a charity event the previous year. She almost changed twice. She did not. At 7:23 on Friday evening, Ethan parked outside the waterfront restaurant. Rain ticked against the windshield. He sat with both hands on the steering wheel. The engine was off. For a moment, he considered calling Molly and telling her something had come up. Sophie would know. That was the problem. He looked at the passenger seat. His phone rested there beside his wallet. A message from Sophie filled the screen. Do not chicken out. Ethan stared at it, then laughed under his breath. He climbed out of the truck. Inside, the hostess checked the reservation. Table 9. Ethan followed her gesture toward the far side of the room. A woman sat near the windows, dark green dress, hands folded beside a glass of water. Claire Bennett lifted her eyes. Ethan stopped walking. For one suspended second, every ordinary thing he knew about Friday night disappeared. Claire rose halfway from her chair. Ethan. He reached the table and looked at the empty seat across from her. Then back at his boss. So he said quietly, I think our sisters and daughters may have just created an HR problem. Claire stared at him. Then, despite everything, the corner of her mouth lifted. Sit down, Walker. Ethan pulled out the chair. Are you ordering me to? For the next hour, I am trying very hard not to. He sat, and for the first time in 14 months, there was no desk clipboard loading schedule or conference room between them. For a few seconds, neither of them reached for the menu. Claire sat with her hands resting near the edge of the table, fingers lightly touching the stem of her water glass. Ethan looked around the room as if there might be another explanation hidden somewhere between the candles and white tablecloths. There was not. The restaurant overlooked the dark water of Commencement Bay. Beyond the windows, cargo lights glowed through the rain and the outlines of cranes stood against the night sky. It was almost funny. Of all the restaurants in Tacoma, Molly had chosen one with a view of the very world Ethan and Claire had spent 14 months trying to keep separate from whatever this was. Claire was the first to speak. I almost canceled 3 times. Ethan leaned back slightly. Only 3. That was before I knew who you were. I almost turned around in the parking lot. What stopped you? He looked down at the table. My daughter. Claire smiled. Sophie. Ethan looked up. You remember her name? The smile left Claire slowly replaced by something more careful. You asked to leave a safety meeting early for her school conference last winter. That was months ago. I remember things. I have noticed. The words came out before Ethan could decide whether they were safe. Claire's eyes held his. For 1 second the atmosphere shifted. Not enough to call it flirting. Too much to call it nothing. A waiter approached with 2 menus tucked under one arm. Good evening. Have you both had a chance to look at the wine list? Claire glanced at Ethan. Ethan glanced at her. Water is probably safer, Claire said. The waiter smiled politely, unaware of why. I will give you a few minutes. When he walked away, Ethan let out a breath through his nose. This is ridiculous. Claire looked down at her menu. Which part Molly? My sister has always confused confidence with permission. She told me you were smart. That sounds like her. She also said you were funny when you remembered how. Claire slowly lowered the menu. She said that word for word. I'm going to change the locks on her house. Ethan smiled. There it is. What the funny part? Claire shook her head, but she was smiling too. That helped. Not enough to make the situation normal, but enough to make sitting across from each other possible. They ordered dinner. For the first 10 minutes, the conversation stayed close to safe territory. Molly, soccer, Tacoma traffic, the weather, a restaurant Claire liked in Gig Harbor. A coffee shop Ethan claimed charged too much for coffee and too little for parking. It was easier than either expected. That bothered them both. At work, conversation always had edges. Numbers, schedules, approvals, problems that needed solving. Here, without those things, they kept discovering they had more to say. Claire asked about Sophie. Ethan's expression changed immediately. Claire had seen him serious. She had seen him tired. She had seen him angry once when a contractor ignored a safety barrier and nearly backed a forklift into a loading lane. She had never seen this. She is 10, Ethan said, which means she knows everything. Claire smiled. Of course. Last week she told me my understanding of marine biology was embarrassing. Is it? Probably. Then she might have a point. I was trying to explain dolphins. What did you say that they are fish? Claire stared at him. Ethan waited. Then Claire laughed. Not the polite laugh she used in meetings, a real one. Ethan watched her for a moment too long. You knew that was wrong, she said. I was tired. That is not a defense. I work for a very demanding company. Claire lifted one eyebrow. So now this is my fault. I did not say that. You implied it. See, this is exactly how quarterly reviews start. Claire shook her head. Ethan smiled again. She wants to design submarines now. Now, last month, she wanted to train dolphins. A clear career progression. Before that, she wanted to become an astronaut. Claire took a sip of water. Ambitious. She gets that from her mother. The sentence changed the air. Not because Ethan became visibly sad. That would have been easier. Instead, his voice simply lowered. Claire did not look away. What was her name? Rebecca. Ethan's eyes moved toward the rain outside the window. Rebecca Walker. Claire waited. She did not tell him he did not have to talk about it. Sometimes that sentence made silence feel like an obligation. Ethan appreciated that she did not say it. She was an engineer, he continued. Claire's expression shifted. You both were. He looked back at her. You know. Claire hesitated. I saw an old credential in your file. Ethan's face became unreadable. Why were you in my full file? I review senior operations personnel. That credential has nothing to do with my current job. I know. Then why did you remember it? Claire looked down at her glass. There were several answers available. None felt entirely safe. Finally, she said, because it did not fit. Ethan waited. Claire continued. You run a terminal floor well, better than most people I have worked with. But sometimes you look at equipment differently than everyone around you. You notice things before maintenance does. You ask questions nobody else thinks to ask. Ethan said nothing. I wondered where that came from. And you found the license. Yes, you could have asked. Claire gave him a look. You barely answer questions about overtime. That is different. Is it? He almost smiled. Then he looked back toward the window. Rebecca's face appeared in his memory so quickly it felt physical. Not the face from the framed photograph at home. A different one. Her standing in their kitchen with a pencil between her teeth reading a drawing spread across the table. Hair twisted into a loose knot. Bare feet on cold tile. She had been explaining something about a connection detail. He had been pretending to listen while making coffee. He would have given anything now to remember the exact words. She was better than me, he said. Claire tilted her head. At engineering, at most things. There was warmth in the answer, not bitterness. That mattered. She was the person people went to when something did not look right. Not because she was loud, she was not. She just did not care if a room full of people wanted a different answer. Claire rested her forearms lightly on the table. Ethan continued. 3 years ago, her team was working on an expansion project south of Seattle. Industrial warehouse, heavy steel frame, tight schedule. His eyes stayed on the table now. There was movement in one of the support connections. Not enough to fail immediately. Enough that she wanted the section unloaded and inspected. Claire listened without moving. Management did not want to lose 2 days. Ethan gave a short, humorless laugh. 2 days. The waiter approached with their meals, saw Ethan's face, and quietly set the plates down without starting the usual speech about enjoying dinner. When he left, Ethan kept speaking. Rebecca filed the concern. She talked to the project manager. She called me that night. Claire watched his hands. They were resting flat against the table now. Still, too still. She was angry, Ethan said. Not scared, angry. She kept saying they were treating uncertainty like permission. Claire's throat tightened. What happened? The section failed the next morning. The restaurant seemed to grow quieter even though nothing around them changed. Rebecca was on site. Claire closed her eyes for one brief second. Ethan stared at his untouched plate. She did not make it out. No one spoke. Outside the window, rain ran down the glass in thin lines. Claire had spent years learning how to respond when employees told her difficult things. A sick parent, a divorce, a child in the hospital, a death in the family. There were phrases people reached for because silence made them uncomfortable. I am so sorry. That is terrible. Let me know if you need anything. All of them true. None of them felt right here. Claire looked at Ethan. Does Sophie remember her? Ethan's shoulders loosened slightly. It was not much. Claire noticed anyway. Yeah, he looked almost relieved. She remembers more than I thought she would. How old was she? 6? That is young, it is. He picked up his fork but did not use it. She remembers Rebecca singing badly in the car. She remembers that she hated peas. She remembers the way she used to leave cabinet doors open. Claire smiled faintly. That sounds dangerous. It was. I hit my head at least twice a week, and Sophie. She does it too. Genetic. I am surrounded. There it was again. A little light returning. Claire let it stay. Ethan took a bite of food, then another. After a while, Claire asked, Is that why you left engineering? His fork stopped. Yes. He said it simply. No hesitation. I resigned 6 weeks later. 6 weeks I tried to go back. He looked toward the harbor lights. I sat in my truck outside the office 3 mornings in a row. Claire said nothing. The 3rd morning I drove away. Why? Ethan took a breath. Because every calculation felt different. Claire waited. He searched for the right words. When you are an engineer, people trust you with things they cannot see. Loads, fatigue, failure points. They walk under structures because someone signed a page saying those structures are safe. His jaw tightened. After Rebecca died, every signature looked like a promise someone could break. Claire looked at him carefully. So you walked away. I needed a job where the worst mistake I could make was a late shipment. You know that is not true. Ethan looked up. What you run a terminal, that is different. People still trust you. Not with the same things. Maybe. Claire folded her hands. But I have watched people follow you during safety drills without asking twice. Ethan looked away. You notice too much. I have been told that. He gave a small smile, then he studied her. What about you? Claire blinked. What about me? You know everything about my dead wife now. That is a dramatic way to phrase it. It is accurate. She sat back. What do you want to know? What do you do when you are not working? Claire stared at him. He waited. She kept staring. Ethan began to smile. You do not know. I know. You really do not. I am thinking. That is worse. Claire looked offended. I have hobbies. Name one. I hike. When was the last time she looked toward the ceiling? Ethan laughed quietly. That bad I own hiking boots. That was not the question. I have used them. Outside, Claire narrowed her eyes. Yes. Recently, do parking lots count? No. Then no. He laughed. Claire could not help joining him. For a few moments, the weight of Rebecca's story remained at the table without swallowing everything else. That surprised Ethan. Usually when people learned he was a widower, something changed. Their voices softened, their eyes filled with caution. They treated him like grief might be contagious. Claire did not. She had listened. Then she had allowed the conversation to keep living. He liked that. Maybe too much. Claire cut into her food. My entire family thinks I work too much. Are they wrong? Yes. Ethan waited. Claire sighed. No. He smiled. She pointed her fork at him. Do not enjoy that. I did not say anything. You did not have to. She ate another bite. Then after a pause she said, My family is complicated. Ethan did not interrupt. My grandfather owned shipping companies. My father served on boards. By the time I started working in logistics, people already knew the name. Bennett. Yes, I did not. Claire smiled. That might be why I like talking to you. The sentence escaped before she could stop it. They both heard it. Neither moved. Claire looked down at her plate. Ethan's voice softened. What did the name change everything? She kept her eyes lowered. If I did well, someone said it was access. If I got promoted, someone said it was connections. If I made a mistake, it proved I never belonged there. So you stopped making mistakes. I tried. That sounds exhausting. It is efficient. That was not my question. Claire looked up. Ethan had no judgment in his face, only curiosity. That was somehow harder to defend against. She took a slow breath. I got good at being useful. Ethan listened. Useful people do not get questioned much. They do not need favors. They do not need anyone to rescue them. That sounds lonely. Claire's eyes stayed on his. It can be. Neither of them spoke after that. The silence was not awkward anymore. It was simply full. Ethan looked at her differently now, not as the executive who walked through the yard in polished shoes. Not as the woman whose approval could change his schedule, as someone who had built her own kind of armor. His was routine. Hers was competence. Different materials. Same purpose. The waiter returned to clear their plates. Dessert. Claire looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the clock on the wall. He had promised the babysitter 10:30. It was only 9. Claire noticed him check the time. Sophie, babysitter. You can go. That sounded like an order. Claire smiled. I am trying to stop doing that. You are not very good at it. I have had 14 months of practice. That explains a lot. They ordered coffee instead. The conversation drifted toward easier things again. Sophie's soccer team, Claire's sister. The fact that Molly apparently believed privacy was a temporary inconvenience. At one point, Ethan reached for the breadbasket, then stopped. Claire noticed. You have been doing that all night. What's starting to reach for something and changing your mind? Ethan looked at his hand. Occupational hazard. That does not make any sense. No. Claire slid the breadbasket closer to him. The motion was small. Almost nothing. Ethan stared at it, then at her. Claire did not say anything. That was why the gesture mattered. He took a piece. By the time they stood to leave, the rain had stopped. The restaurant windows reflected the room behind them and the black water beyond. Outside, the pavement shone beneath streetlights. Claire pulled on her coat. Ethan opened the door for her. Cold air moved in from the bay. They stood beneath the awning. Cars hissed past on wet streets. For the first time since sitting down, there was nothing left to hide behind. No menu, no waiter, no coffee cup. Just the fact that they had stayed. Claire tucked a strand of hair behind one ear. Monday. Ethan nodded. Monday. We should be clear. I know. At work nothing changes. Agreed. You are still part of my organization, I know. I cannot have anyone thinking you are getting special treatment. You will not give me any. No. He almost smiled. That sounded confident. It was. Ethan looked toward the parking lot. I can request a transfer. Claire's eyes moved to him immediately. No. The answer came too fast. Ethan looked back. Claire realized it. She corrected her tone. You do not need to move departments because Molly made an irresponsible social decision. That is one way to describe it. If you want to transfer for professional reasons, that is different. I do not. Then do not ask for one. Ethan studied her. What if people talk they always do? That does not mean it cannot hurt you. Claire's expression changed. There was something almost defensive in it. I can handle my career. I know. Then why are you trying to protect it for me? Ethan did not answer immediately, because he had spent 3 years measuring every choice by what could be lost. Because the idea of causing damage to Claire's career unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Because he had liked this dinner, enough to make him afraid of it. He slipped his hands into his coat pockets. I do not want one dinner to cost you something. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, Maybe I get to decide what is worth the cost. The words hung between them. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Not excitement exactly, something more dangerous. Hope. Claire looked toward her car. We should go. Probably. Neither moved. Then Claire smiled faintly. Good night, Ethan. At work she had never used his first name. Not once. He noticed. Good night, Claire. She noticed, too. Claire walked toward her car. Ethan stayed beneath the awning until she reached it. She opened the door, paused, looked back. He was still standing there. Their eyes met across the wet parking lot. Then Claire got into the car. Ethan finally walked toward his truck. On the drive home, Tacoma blurred past in reflections of red lights and wet asphalt. He should have been thinking about the obvious problems. Claire was his boss, not directly in the simple sense, but high enough above him that any relationship could become complicated fast. People talked. Companies had policies. Careers could be damaged by things that had nothing to do with performance. He knew all of that. Instead, he thought about her laugh. He thought about the way she had not looked away when he said Rebecca's name. He thought about the breadbasket. A ridiculous thing to remember. Still, he remembered it. At home, Sophie was asleep on the couch under a blanket. The babysitter sat nearby watching television with the volume low. Ethan paid her and walked her to the door. When he returned, Sophie opened one eye. You are awake. No. You are talking. I sleep talk. He picked up the remote and turned off the television. Sophie sat up. Well, what? She gave him the same look Rebecca used to give him when he pretended not to understand obvious questions. The date. It was fine. Fine, yes, that means bad. No. Then good Ethan folded the blanket. Sophie. She smiled. You liked her. I did not say that. You got home later than you said. Dinner took a while. You are smiling. He stopped folding. I am not. You are. Go to bed. Sophie stood. As she passed him, she said, You liked her. Ethan watched her walk upstairs. At the top, she turned. Is she nice? He thought about Claire sitting across from him, about the way she listened, about the way she admitted loneliness without asking him to feel sorry for her. Yeah, he said. Sophie nodded. Good. Then she disappeared down the hallway. Ethan stood alone in the living room. Rebecca's photograph sat on the shelf near the stairs. For a moment he looked at it. The old guilt came almost automatically, quiet, familiar, as if enjoying dinner with someone had somehow betrayed a promise he had never actually made. He walked toward the photograph. Rebecca was still smiling from inside the frame. He touched the wood once. "I went," he said softly. The room gave him no answer. He did not need one. Monday morning arrived too quickly. The operations room smelled of coffee, wet jackets, and dry erase marker. Ethan stood in his usual place near the back. Claire entered at 6:44, hair tied back, navy blazer, tablet in hand. Regional Director Bennett again. If anyone had watched them closely, they might have noticed something strange. They were more professional than usual. Claire addressed every manager by last name. Ethan kept his answers shorter. Neither allowed their eyes to rest anywhere they did not need to. The briefing should have lasted 18 minutes. It lasted 23. When everyone left, Ethan stayed near the doorway. Claire continued writing on her tablet. "You are still here." That sounded like an observation. It was. He stepped farther into the room. "I thought about the transfer." Claire's hand stopped. So did I. Ethan looked at her. She set the tablet down. "Is that what you want, no? Then we agree. It is not that simple. No." Claire folded her arms. "But making a decision because we are afraid someone might invent a story is not simple either." Ethan lowered his voice. "What happens if I make a mistake at work?" "Yes, I treat it like any other mistake. What happens if I do something well? I treat that like anything else, too. What happens if somebody decides you are not Claire?" Held his eyes. "That is my problem." "No." The firmness in his voice surprised her. He continued. "That is exactly the problem." Claire did not answer. Ethan stepped closer to the table, though there was still several feet between them. "I do not want you defending every decision involving me because somebody finds out we had dinner." Claire's expression softened slightly. "Neither do I. So what do we do?" She looked at him. There was no easy answer. That was the first honest thing about the situation. After several seconds, Claire said, "We do our jobs." Ethan almost smiled. That sounds suspiciously like something printed in an employee handbook. "It is 6:50 in the morning. I am doing my best." He laughed once, quietly. Claire looked toward the glass wall of the conference room. People were already moving through the corridor outside. She lowered her voice. "And we are careful." Ethan nodded. Careful. The word felt familiar. Too familiar. He turned toward the door. Claire picked up her tablet. Neither noticed Richard Hale standing farther down the hallway near the copy room. He had not heard everything. Only enough. Transfer. Dinner. Careful. Richard watched Ethan leave the conference room. Then he looked through the glass at Claire. She was already reading the next report. Her face revealed nothing. Richard's did. For the first time since Claire Bennett had taken the regional director position he believed belonged to him. He had seen something in her professional armor that looked almost like a seam. Out in the yard, Ethan pulled on his safety vest and stepped into the cold morning air. Container trucks moved between lanes, engines idled, steel cables clicked in the wind. Above the terminal, Crane 6 stood against the gray Tacoma sky. Ethan glanced up at it out of habit. Then he kept walking. By Wednesday afternoon, Ethan had almost convinced himself the strangeness of Friday night had been contained. Almost. Work had resumed its usual shape. Shift briefings, equipment checks, container counts, safety walkthroughs, people complaining about the weather as if Tacoma had personally wronged them. Claire kept her distance. So did Ethan. There were no private conversations, no lingering looks, no coffee waiting beside his clipboard. Nothing that could be mistaken for anything other than professional routine, and still everything felt different. Ethan noticed when Claire entered a room. Claire noticed when Ethan was absent from one. They had become careful enough to make their awareness of each other impossible to ignore. That afternoon, Ethan stood beside the maintenance desk reviewing a stack of equipment logs when Caleb dropped a folder beside him. Crane 6. Ethan looked up. What about it? Quarterly inspection got pushed. Ethan stopped turning pages. Pushed to when next cycle? That is 3 months. Caleb shrugged. Maintenance says it is fine. Ethan opened the folder. The deferral authorization sat on top. approved by Richard Hale. Reason listed as operational continuity and acceptable visual condition. Ethan read it twice. Then he flipped to the inspection photographs. Most people would have looked at them for seconds. Ethan did not. He enlarged one image on the terminal computer. A connector plate near the upper boom assembly filled the screen. There was discoloration around one edge. A thin, dark line ran away from the bolt pattern. Ethan leaned closer. Caleb watched him. "What?" Ethan pointed. "You see that, the dirt? I do not think that is dirt." Caleb leaned toward the monitor. It passed. A lot of things pass until someone looks twice. He opened the previous inspection report. Then the one before that. The same joint appeared in both. The line was smaller in the older photograph, barely visible. Ethan felt something tighten behind his ribs. He knew that feeling. He hated it. The part of him he had spent 3 years burying had recognized the pattern before the rest of him could argue. Repeated load, localized stress, possible fatigue. He sat back. Caleb studied his face. "How bad, I do not know. That sounds bad. It means I do not know." Ethan printed the 3 images. He carried them across the yard to the maintenance shop. Frank Delgado was standing beneath a fluorescent light with a wrench in one hand and reading glasses balanced low on his nose. Ethan placed the photographs on the workbench. Frank looked at them, then at Ethan. "Who gave you those? They are company records. That was not my question." Ethan tapped the newest image. This joint was deferred. Frank looked away. Richard signed it. "I saw. Then you have your answer." "No, I have a signature." Frank slowly set the wrench down. Ethan watched him. "Who inspected it?" "Report says Morrison. Did Morrison inspect it?" Frank's jaw moved slightly. He reached for the wrench again. "Ask Morrison. He is in Spokane this week." "Then wait." Ethan did not move. "Frank." The older man looked at him. For years, Frank had the face of someone who could make silence feel like a decision. This time was no different. "You have a daughter, right?" Ethan frowned. "What does Sophie have to do with this? Everything has something to do with your kid once you have one. That is not an answer." Frank slid the photographs back toward him. "Sometimes you see a problem and you fix it. Sometimes you see a problem and you make sure it belongs to somebody above your pay grade." Ethan stared at him. "You are telling me to leave it alone. I am telling you that you do not know what you are looking at." "Yes, I do." Frank's eyes narrowed. The shop noise carried around them. An impact wrench rattled somewhere behind a partition. A truck backed outside, warning alarm beeping in slow intervals. Frank lowered his voice. "That is exactly what worries me." Ethan took the photographs. Why, Frank said nothing. Ethan waited. Then Frank turned away. Conversation over. Ethan walked back toward operations with the pages under one arm. The wind coming off the bay had sharpened. He could smell salt diesel cold steel. Crane 6 moved slowly above the yard, a container lifted from a waiting chassis. Ethan stopped. He watched the boom, watched the load, watched the connection he could not see clearly from the ground. The container rose, swung, settled onto the deck of a freighter. Routine. Perfectly routine. His body refused to believe it. By 2:15, the photographs were on Claire's desk. She looked at Ethan across from her. No softness now, no trace of Friday night. Only attention. "Walk me through it." Ethan pulled the newest photo closer. "This line starts near the edge of the connector plate." Claire leaned forward. "You think it is a crack?" "I think it could be." "Could be, yes, not is." "No." Claire nodded once. That answer mattered. She turned to the older photographs. "What changed length?" "Maybe width. Hard to tell from pictures. Could it be surface wear, could be?" Claire looked at him. "You sound less certain than you did walking in." "I am certain it needs a closer inspection." "That is different." "Yes." She studied the images again. How urgent Ethan looked toward the windows behind her. From Claire's office, part of Crane 6 was visible between container stacks. "I would not put anybody under that boom until someone qualified verifies it." Claire sat back. "Maintenance cleared it." "I know. Richard approved the deferral." "I know. And you're asking me to shut down one of the busiest cranes in Tacoma because of 3 photographs. I am asking you to get someone in front of it before another full quarter goes by." Claire watched him. Ethan did not press. He did not need to. She picked up the phone. "Get me structural review." Ethan's expression shifted slightly. That was fast. I asked how worried you were. I told you. And I listened. She spoke into the phone. Tomorrow morning. Independent engineers. Crane 6. I want the last 12 months of inspection records in the room. She ended the call. Ethan remained standing. Claire looked at him. Anything else? He hesitated. Frank acted strange. Frank always acts strange. This was different. Claire folded her hands. How he told me to leave the issue above my pay grade. That does not sound like Frank. No. Claire looked toward the yard. Then we ask questions tomorrow. Ethan nodded. He turned toward the door. Ethan. He stopped. Claire waited until he looked back. You did the right thing bringing it here. He held her eyes. That is what Rebecca thought too. The sentence landed harder than he intended. Claire's face changed. Ethan looked away. Sorry, do not apologize. He nodded once and left. The next morning, the conference room smelled of burnt coffee and printer toner. 2 outside engineers sat on one side of the table. One was a gray-haired man named Paul Mercer. The other was a younger woman named Naomi Reed who had arrived carrying 2 laptops and a stack of certification manuals. Richard sat across from them. Claire stood near the end of the table. Ethan remained by the photographs. Richard looked at him before the meeting even started. I am still unclear why operations is participating in an engineering review. Claire answered without looking at him. Because operations identified the discrepancy. Richard leaned back. Operations identifies discrepancies every day. This one involves load-bearing equipment, and we have certified maintenance personnel. Claire placed the photographs on the table. Then this should be quick. Paul studied the first image. Naomi opened the digital version and zoomed in. Ethan said nothing. He wanted them to see it without him directing them. Naomi was the first to stop moving. She enlarged the joint, then opened the image from 6 months earlier. Paul leaned closer. Richard noticed. What Naomi pointed at the screen, that line. Richard frowned. Surface scoring. Maybe. Ethan looked at her. She looked back. You do not think so, she said. Ethan stepped closer. No. Richard turned. Again, why are we asking him? Claire's voice stayed even. We are not asking him. We are reviewing evidence. Ethan pointed to the photograph. The mark begins near a high-stress region. It is longer in the most recent image than it was 6 months ago. Paul nodded slowly. Could be fatigue propagation. Richard crossed his arms. It passed visual inspection. Ethan looked at him. A visual inspection tells you what the surface looks like. Richard's face tightened. Ethan continued. It does not tell you what is happening inside the metal. I understand inspections. Then you understand the difference. The room went quiet. Richard turned toward Claire. He is not licensed right now. Claire said neither photograph cares. Richard stared at her. Naomi looked down to hide the beginning of a smile. Paul cleared his throat. We need non-destructive testing. How long, Claire asked. Half a day if we can get access. Richard leaned forward. Half a day means missing the evergreen load window. Claire looked at him. We are discussing a structural connection. We are discussing a possibility. Ethan answered. We are discussing a possibility attached to 40 tons over people's heads. Richard turned sharply. I did not ask you. Claire closed the folder in front of her. Schedule the test. Richard looked at her. Claire, schedule it. His jaw tightened. You know what this does to the weekly numbers. Yes, you know the board is reviewing terminal efficiency Friday. Yes. And you are still shutting down a crane based on a suspicion from a supervisor who has not practiced engineering in 3 years. Claire's eyes did not move. I am ordering a test based on visible evidence and the recommendation of 2 independent engineers. Paul nodded. Richard had nowhere to go. He pushed back from the table. Fine. The words sounded anything but. After the others left, Ethan stayed to gather the photographs. Claire remained near the window. He noticed she was staring at the yard. That went well. Claire looked back at him. Your definition of well needs work. No one threw anything. That is your standard on the terminal. Yes. She almost smiled. Then the expression faded. I need to make one change. Ethan waited. Until this review is complete, I am removing myself from any decision involving your compensation or performance evaluation. His brows drew together. Why, you know why. Claire. No. Her voice was quiet but firm. We had dinner. One dinner. That is enough for someone to question my judgment. He looked toward the closed door. Richard does not matter. He clearly does. Claire turned to face him fully. This is not about him. Then what is it about being able to look at every decision I make involving you and know there is nothing to explain? Ethan said nothing. Claire continued. I am not stepping away from safety decisions. I am stepping away from anything personal to your career. You do not have to do that. Yes, I do. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. Claire exhaled quietly. Ethan picked up the photographs. At the door, he stopped. For what it is worth, I would have brought this to you even if Friday never happened. Claire held his gaze. I know. That mattered more than either said. Later that afternoon, Ethan returned to the maintenance records. This time, he did not look only at Crane 6. He looked at every deferral Richard had approved over the past 2 years. Individually, none looked extraordinary. One postponed bearing inspection, one delayed cable replacement, one visual check substituted for a full shutdown. Each had a reason. Labor shortage, weather delay, customer schedule, budget pressure. Together they formed something else, a pattern. Ethan printed the records. Caleb watched from the next desk. You building a case, I am looking. At Richard at the paperwork. That sounds like yes. Ethan kept reading. Near 5, Claire walked through the operations floor. She did not stop beside him, only slowed enough to place a paper cup near the edge of his desk. Coffee. Ethan looked up. Claire was already moving. You skipped lunch. He stared at the cup. How do you know that she did not turn? You leave wrappers everywhere when you eat. Caleb looked from the coffee to Ethan. Ethan picked it up. Do not. Caleb raised both hands. I did not say anything. You were about to. I absolutely was. Ethan shook his head. Across the yard, Richard stood near the upper office windows. He saw Claire leave the operations floor. He saw the cup in Ethan's hand. His face remained still, but his attention sharpened. That night, just after midnight, Crane 6 gave its first warning. A control panel alarm sounded for 11 seconds, then stopped. The overnight operator glanced at the screen. No active fault. He wrote nothing down. By morning, the alarm history showed no record. Ethan heard about it from a dock worker smoking near the east gate. Sounded weird, the man said. What kind of alarm? High tone. Fast repeat. Which Crane 6? Ethan's stomach tightened. You log it. Was not my station. Who was Danvers? Ethan found Danvers. The operator rubbed his face. It cleared itself. Did you reset anything? No. Did you delete the log? No. Ethan stared at him. Danvers looked uneasy. I am telling you it was there, then it was not. Ethan went straight to Frank. The maintenance shop was nearly empty. Frank was alone at the rear bench. Ethan closed the door behind him. Frank looked up. You heard? Yes. Frank's face changed. The old caution was still there. Now something else lived beside it. Fear. Ethan stepped closer. Talk to me. Frank looked toward the small window in the door. Then he reached inside his jacket. He removed a spiral notebook. Worn cover, grease-stained edges. He placed it on the workbench. Ethan looked at it. What is this, my memory? Frank opened it. Dates filled the pages. Work orders, initials, equipment numbers. 3 separate inspection entries for Crane 6. Each had notes beside them. Not completed. Partial only. Signed under direction. Ethan looked up. Richard Frank did not answer. He did not need to. Ethan turned another page. 2 years of entries. Not just Crane 6. Several pieces of equipment. How long have you been keeping this? Since the first time he asked me to sign for work we did not finish. Why did you sign? Frank looked away. Because I had 30 years in, because my wife was sick, because retirement was close enough to see. Pick one. Ethan's voice lowered. Why did you keep notes? Because I wanted to believe I was still a decent man. The room went quiet. Frank swallowed. I kept telling myself I would say something after I retired. 6 months, yeah. And now Frank looked toward the yard. Now I heard that alarm. He pushed the notebook toward Ethan. You are the only person here who kept looking. Ethan stared at the pages. Rebecca's voice moved through his memory. They are treating uncertainty like permission. His fingers closed around the notebook. Can I take this? Frank nodded. If you are going to do something with it. Ethan did not go home. He drove across Tacoma through cold rain with the notebook on the passenger seat. Claire's address was in his phone from an emergency contact directory. He hated that he had to use it. He hated more what he was carrying. At 1:40 in the morning, he stood beneath her porch light. Claire opened the door wearing gray sweatpants, an old college sweatshirt, and no trace of the woman who ran morning briefings. She looked at his face, then at the notebook. What happened? I think the crane problem is bigger than the crane. She opened the door wider. Come in. They worked at her kitchen table for nearly 2 hours. Frank's notebook beside maintenance reports, Ethan reading dates, Claire checking digital approvals, coffee cooling untouched, rain tapping against the windows. At one point, Claire stopped. March 14th. Ethan found the page. Inspection incomplete. Claire turned her laptop toward him. Corporate record says full inspection completed. He stared. Approved by Hale, yes. Another date, another match, another false entry. By 2:30, neither of them needed to say what they were seeing. Claire closed the notebook. Her face had gone pale. This is not cost-cutting. No, this is falsification. Yes. She stood and walked toward the kitchen window. Ethan watched her. For once, Claire did not look composed. She looked angry, not afraid for her title, not worried about what the board would say. Angry. How many people have worked under that crane? Ethan said nothing. Claire closed her eyes, then opened them. I am shutting 6 down at sunrise. Richard will fight it. He can. He will say the evidence is incomplete. Claire turned. Then we complete it with the crane turned off. Ethan nodded. Claire looked at the notebook again. I should have seen this. You were not here when it started. I have been here 14 months. You oversee 3 terminals. That is not an excuse. No. She looked at him sharply. Ethan did not soften it. That is why you are going to fix it now. Claire stared at him. Then something in her expression steadied. Not because he comforted her, because he did not. She reached for her phone. Ethan glanced toward the clock. Who are you calling legal? At 2:30? Yes. That will make someone happy. I am not responsible for their happiness. He smiled despite himself. Claire almost did too. Then her attention moved back to the records. Ethan stood across from her kitchen table. For a moment, neither looked like boss or employee, only 2 people staring at a truth that had become too dangerous to ignore. Claire dialed. Ethan opened Frank's notebook again. Outside, rain moved across the dark Tacoma streets. At the terminal, Crane 6 stood silent against the bay, its steel frame hidden by fog. Claire made 3 calls before Ethan left her house. The first went to legal. The second went to Paul Mercer. The third went to the terminal control office. By the time Ethan stepped back into the rain, the sky over Tacoma was beginning to lose its blackness. He stood beside his truck for a moment with one hand on the door. He had not slept. Neither had Claire. Frank's notebook was now sealed inside a document envelope on Claire's kitchen table beside printed maintenance records and copies of the Crane 6 inspection photographs. Ethan should have felt relieved. The problem had been reported. The right people knew. The crane would be taken out of service. He had done what Rebecca had always believed people were supposed to do when the facts became uncomfortable. Speak. Make someone listen. Do not let uncertainty become permission. Still, as Ethan drove toward the terminal, something would not settle inside him. Rain brushed across the windshield. The wipers moved back and forth in steady rhythm. He passed dark storefronts, traffic lights blinking over nearly empty streets, and the first delivery trucks beginning their morning routes. At a red light, he looked at the clock. 5:12. He had just enough time to go home, shower, wake Sophie, pretend he had slept somewhere in the night. Instead, he called Molly. She answered after 4 rings. Her voice was thick with sleep. If someone is not actively bleeding, I am hanging up. Ethan almost smiled. I need a favor. There was a pause. Then her voice changed. Is Sophie okay? She is fine. What happened? Work. At 5 in the morning, I have been there all night. You sound terrible. Thank you. What do you need? Can Sophie get ready at your place this morning? Another pause. Of course. I will be home before she leaves if I can. Ethan. He waited. Is this dangerous? He looked through the windshield toward the faint orange glow beginning to form over the industrial district. Not if we do this right. Molly heard enough in his voice not to push. I will get her. Thank you. Ethan. Yeah, do this right. He closed his eyes briefly. I will. He ended the call. At the terminal, the morning crew was beginning to arrive. Floodlights still burned across the yard. The steel frames of the cranes stood above the container stacks like dark skeletons against the gray sky. Crane 6 was already in motion. Ethan stopped walking. For 1 second, he thought he was seeing it wrong. The boom was moving. A spreader descended toward a container near berth 3. His pulse jumped. He grabbed the radio from his vest. Control, this is Walker. Why is 6 active static? Then the voice of the floor dispatcher. Early load request. Who authorized it? Operations. I am operations. A pause. Then the dispatcher said, Hail. Ethan closed his eyes. Of course, stop the lift. I cannot. What do you mean you cannot? Container is already engaged. Then put it back down. Richard says finish the cycle. Ethan started walking faster. Put it down. Another voice broke across the radio. Richard, Walker, stand down. Ethan stopped. Cold air moved through his jacket. Richard, Crane 6 is under structural review, and it has not been formally removed from service. It will be. Then, when it is, we stop using it. Ethan stared toward the crane. You know about the alarm. Silence. Then Richard answered. I know an unverified signal was reported. It was deleted from the system. Do you have proof? Put the container down? Richard's voice hardened. We have a vessel waiting on a load window. 1 lift, then you can have your inspection. Ethan looked up. The spreader locked onto the container. The cables tightened. Something deep in his chest turned cold. Richard, I said stand down. The container began to rise. Ethan heard the first sound before anyone else reacted. Not a crash, not a siren, a metallic pop. Sharp, small, almost lost beneath the engines and wind. Ethan froze. Rebecca's voice moved through his memory. Not the memory he usually carried. Not her laugh. Not her standing barefoot in the kitchen. Her voice on the phone the night before she died. There is movement in the connection. They keep telling me it is within tolerance. Ethan looked up at Crane 6. The container rose another foot. His eyes fixed on the upper connector. The plate shifted. Barely, but it shifted. He dropped his coffee. Clear the radius. Workers turned. Ethan was already running. Move! His voice cut across the yard. A dock worker near the loading zone hesitated. Ethan pointed. Out, now, the man ran. Another worker stepped backward from beneath the outer edge of the boom. Ethan reached for his radio. Emergency stop on 6. Emergency stop now, the dispatcher answered. Trying. Do not try. Kill power. The crane operator shouted something from above. The load swung slightly in the wind. Then came another sound. Louder. A tearing groan of stressed metal. Everyone in the yard heard that one. The connector plate opened along the line Ethan had seen in the photographs. A crack ran across the steel. Dust and rust fell from the joint. The boom dropped, 6 feet, maybe 7. The suspended container swung outward. Someone screamed. Ethan saw 2 men near the marked loading lane. Run. They ran. The container swept across the space they had occupied seconds earlier. The crane's emergency brake engaged with a deep mechanical slam. The boom stopped. The container continued swinging. One direction, then the other, slowly losing momentum. The yard went silent except for alarms. Ethan stood near the edge of the exclusion zone. His hands were shaking. His mouth was dry. He could hear his own breathing. For a few seconds he was not in Tacoma. He was 3 years earlier. A phone call. A construction site. Police lights. A man asking whether he was Rebecca Walker's husband. A white hard hat lying on a folding table because someone had removed it from the wreckage. Ethan blinked. Tacoma returned. Workers. Alive. Moving. Looking at him, he forced air into his lungs. Everybody back. His voice sounded distant to him. Full yard isolation around 6. Nobody enters the radius. Caleb ran toward him. You okay? Lock the access road? Ethan, lock it. Caleb nodded and ran. Ethan lifted the radio. Control, confirm operator status. A voice answered. Operator is safe. Ground crew counting now. Count twice. His hands continued shaking. He curled one into a fist around the radio. Medical response on standby even if nobody reports injury. Copy. Ethan walked toward the boundary line and looked up. The failed connector was visible now, not clearly enough. The exact section he had flagged, the exact location Richard had dismissed as a possibility. An engine roared behind him. Claire's SUV entered the yard too fast, stopped near the operations building, and the driver's door opened before the engine was off. Claire ran, no umbrella, no coat buttoned. Her hair had been pulled back badly enough that several strands had already escaped. She crossed the concrete toward the crane. Ethan. He heard her. Did not turn immediately. She reached him. Her eyes moved over his face, then his arms, his hands. Checking. Are you hurt? No, anybody. Not yet. Claire looked toward the crew. Not yet. We are still confirming. A supervisor approached. Head count complete. Everybody is here. Claire closed her eyes for 1 second. Anyone injured? One guy twisted an ankle getting clear. That is it. She released a breath. Only then did she look up at Crane 6. Her face changed. The metal plate had torn open. The boom hung lower on one side. The container remained suspended above empty concrete. Claire stared. When 6 minutes ago, I sent the shutdown order. It was not in the terminal system yet. Claire turned sharply. What Ethan looked toward the operations building. Hale authorized one final lift. Her expression went still, very still. The kind of stillness Ethan had learned meant Claire was furious enough to stop wasting movement. Behind them, tires rolled across wet pavement. Richard arrived in a company vehicle. He stepped out already, speaking into his phone. Yes, I am at the site now. No reported injuries. We are treating it as an equipment failure. Claire turned. Richard ended the call. He looked from Claire to Ethan, then toward the crane. His face remained composed. Too composed. We isolate the equipment, he said. Engineering assesses the mechanical failure and we file the incident report. Ethan stared at him. Richard looked at him. What? This was not a mechanical surprise. Richard's eyes hardened. No one said it was. You authorized that lift after we flagged the connector. I authorized one load cycle on equipment that was still legally in service. You knew about the alarm. An unverified alarm. You knew about the inspection problem. I knew you had an opinion. Ethan took one step closer. Claire moved slightly between them. Not enough to block Ethan, enough to keep the conversation from becoming something else. Richard looked toward her. Claire, we need to be careful about what gets said before we know the cause. Ethan laughed once. It held no humor. Careful. Richard ignored him. We cannot accuse people of falsifying records because a crane failed. Claire's eyes narrowed. I did not accuse anyone. Richard looked at Ethan. He clearly is. Ethan's hands began shaking again. This time not from fear. Frank's notebook is with legal. Richard's face changed. Only slightly. Claire saw it. Ethan saw it too. Richard recovered. I have no idea what you are talking about. Yes, you do. That is enough, Claire said. Richard turned to her. She continued. Crane 6 is now under full incident control. No equipment moves in this section until Paul Mercer clears it. Richard looked toward the freighter. You realize what that means? Yes. We missed the load window. Yes. The client charges delay penalties. Claire held his gaze. Yes. His jaw tightened. You are willing to shut down half this yard over one failed component. Claire looked up at the broken crane. One failed component nearly dropped 40 tons onto 2 employees. They were outside the designated zone. Ethan turned toward him so quickly, Claire put one hand against Ethan's arm, not restraining him, grounding him. Richard saw the gesture. His eyes lowered to Claire's hand, then returned to her face. Something calculating entered his expression. Claire removed her hand. Richard said nothing, but the moment had registered. Ethan did not care. What did you say? Richard looked at him. I said procedures exist for a reason. So do inspections. Claire stepped between them fully now. Enough. Richard's mouth tightened. She pointed toward the administration building. Conference room. 10 minutes. Bring every authorization you issued on Crane 6 in the last 24 hours. Richard gave a small, disbelieving laugh. Are you investigating me? Claire's voice remained calm. I am preserving evidence. That sounds like a yes. Then bring the records. Richard stared at her. For several seconds, no one moved. Then he turned and walked away. Ethan watched him go. Claire looked at Ethan. His face had gone pale, not from the argument. She knew. "Come sit down. I am fine. You are shaking. I am fine. Ethan." He looked at her. The yard noise seemed far away. Claire lowered her voice. "You do not need to be fine right now. That almost broke something." He looked away. "I heard it." "What the metal?" He swallowed. "The sound." Claire waited. Ethan stared at the damaged crane. "I heard the same kind of sound in the investigation recording from Rebecca's site." His breathing changed. Claire said nothing. "After the accident, they played the security audio for me." His voice was quieter. "There was this sound right before the frame came down." Claire's chest tightened. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face. "When 6 moved, I knew. You got them out. I knew before I even looked. You got them out." He looked at her. His eyes were wet now. Not crying. Close. "Last time I knew something was wrong too." Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan stared at the concrete. "The night before Rebecca died, she called me." Claire remained still. "She told me they were refusing to shut the section down." His voice became uneven. "She asked me if I thought she should keep pushing." Claire's face softened. "What did you say?" "I told her she had already filed the report." He laughed once, bitterly. "I told her to go home." "Ethan, I told her the system would handle it." He pressed his lips together. "For 3 years I kept telling myself I did not know enough to change anything." Claire did not interrupt. "Maybe that is true." He looked at Crane 6, "But I knew enough to be worried." A long silence passed. Workers moved behind safety tape. Emergency lights reflected across wet concrete. Ethan sat on the rear step of a response truck. Claire sat beside him. Their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. After a while, Ethan said, "First time I could not stop it." Claire looked at him. "This time I could." His voice broke on the last word. Claire did not tell him Rebecca would be proud. She did not tell him the accidents were different. She did not tell him to forgive himself. She sat beside him. That was all. And somehow it was enough for that moment. An hour later, Paul Mercer arrived. Naomi came with him. They inspected the failed connection from a raised platform after the load had been secured. Paul returned to the ground with his face set. Claire met him near the boundary. Well, he removed his gloves. Fatigue crack. Ethan looked at him. Paul continued. Propagation was deeper than the photograph showed. Richard stood several feet away. How long? Paul looked at him. Long enough that the previous inspection should have caught evidence of it. Richard folded his arms. Should have. Yes, that is not the same as did. No. Paul handed Claire a preliminary note. But this did not develop overnight. Richard's face remained blank. Naomi stepped closer. The fracture surface shows repeated loading over time. Ethan asked, "Could a full test 6 months ago have found it?" Naomi looked at Paul. Paul answered, "Very likely." Richard turned away. Claire watched him. "Richard." He stopped. "Did you personally approve the last deferral?" He looked back. "You have the paperwork." "I am asking you." "Yes." "Why we had operational targets." Claire's expression sharpened. "That is not an engineering reason. I never claimed it was. You deferred an engineering inspection for an operational target. I deferred an inspection based on maintenance guidance." Whose? Richard hesitated. Claire saw it. Whose guidance? He looked toward the terminal office. "I will pull the file." "Good." She turned to Paul. "I want every component on 6 photographed before anything is moved." Paul nodded. "Already started. And the electronic alarm history." Richard looked back. Claire continued. "Preserve system logs before anyone accesses the control records." His expression changed again. Claire saw that too. By noon, legal counsel had arrived from Seattle. So had corporate compliance. Frank sat in a small office with a company attorney and a union representative. His notebook rested inside a clear evidence sleeve. Ethan passed the door once. Frank looked up through the glass. Their eyes met. Frank looked terrified. Ethan stopped. The attorney noticed and opened the door. "Mr. Walker, we need privacy." Ethan nodded. Frank spoke before the door closed. "Ethan." He turned. Frank looked at him. "I should have done it sooner." Ethan held his gaze. "Do it now." Frank nodded. The door closed. The rest of the afternoon became paperwork, statements, timelines, photographs, radio logs, witness interviews. Ethan described the sound he heard, the movement he saw, his evacuation call, the exact sequence before the connector failed. He answered the same questions 3 times for 3 different people. Each time his hand stayed steadier. Claire was interviewed separately. So was Richard. At 4:15, Ethan sat alone in the break room with an untouched sandwich. Caleb entered. He stood near the vending machine for a few seconds, then said, "You saved Luis." Ethan looked up. "What?" Luis was one of the guys under the swing path. Ethan looked back at the sandwich. He moved. "Because you screamed at him." Ethan said nothing. Caleb sat across from him. "He has 3 kids." Ethan closed his eyes. Caleb did not say anything else. After a while, he stood. At the door, he looked back. "Just thought you should know." Ethan remained alone. He finally took one bite of the sandwich. His phone buzzed. Sophie. He stared at her name, then answered. "Hey, Dad." Her voice was quiet. Molly had probably told her something had happened. "Hey, Soph, are you okay?" "Yeah. Are you sure?" He smiled faintly. "You sound like Molly. That is not an answer." Rebecca again. Always Rebecca in the corners of Sophie. "I am okay." "What happened?" "Something at work broke." "Did anybody get hurt?" "No." A pause. "Did you know?" Another pause. "Were you scared?" Ethan looked through the break room window toward the yard. Crane 6 stood frozen against the afternoon sky. "Yeah." Sophie breathed quietly into the phone. "Okay." He frowned. "Okay, Mom used to get scared at work too." Ethan's throat tightened. "She told you that sometimes." He closed his eyes. Sophie continued. "She said being scared means you should pay attention." Ethan looked down. He could almost hear Rebecca saying it. "Your mom said a lot of things. She talked a lot." Ethan laughed softly. "She did. Are you coming home soon?" "Promise, yes." "Okay." She hesitated. "Dad." "Yeah, I am glad nobody got hurt." He looked toward the crane. "So am I." The emergency board session was scheduled for 2 days later in Seattle. Claire spent most of Thursday preparing. She did not see Ethan outside official interviews. That was deliberate. The situation had become too serious for anything else. At 5:30 Thursday evening, Richard entered her office without knocking. Claire looked up from a binder. "Do you need something?" He closed the door. "I think you are making a mistake." "Which one?" "This investigation." Claire leaned back. "That is an unusual concern from someone who says he did nothing wrong." Richard sat without being invited. "You have compliance looking at 2 years of records." "Yes. You have legal interviewing employees like suspects. Witnesses. You know how this looks." Claire stared at him. "Yes." He lowered his voice. "You are blowing up an entire terminal because your favorite supervisor panicked over a photograph." Claire's expression hardened. "Do not do that." "Do what?" "Pretend this is about Ethan." Richard smiled faintly. "Isn't it?" Claire said nothing. Richard continued. "People saw you Friday night." Her pulse shifted. She did not show it. He watched her. "Restaurant near Ruston." Claire closed the binder. "What exactly are you saying? I'm saying perception matters." Then perceived the failed crane. "I am serious." "So am I." Richard leaned forward. "If the board thinks you started a major investigation because a man you are seeing told you to, your judgment becomes part of the issue." Claire held his gaze. "We had one dinner with someone who works under your authority, which I disclosed." Richard's expression changed. Claire saw satisfaction disappear from his face. To legal, she continued. "Before the crane failed." He leaned back. "You disclosed it?" "Yes." "And I removed myself from decisions regarding his compensation and performance." Richard stared at her. Claire opened the binder again. "If that was the argument you came here to test, you have your answer." His jaw tightened. "This is not over. No." Claire looked down at the records. "It isn't." Richard stood. He remained by the door for a moment, then left. Claire waited until the door closed. Only then did she let out the breath she had been holding. Friday morning, the boardroom on the 22nd floor of the Seattle Regional Headquarters overlooked Elliott Bay. The view was beautiful. Nobody looked at it. Claire sat on one side of the long table, legal counsel beside her, Paul Mercer and Naomi Reed farther down. Ethan sat near the end with Frank. Richard sat opposite them with his own counsel. The board chair, Margaret Sloan, opened the meeting. "Let's keep this factual." Claire almost smiled. There was nothing simple left about the facts. For the first 40 minutes, the meeting stayed technical. Paul presented the fracture analysis. Naomi explained the fatigue pattern. Maintenance records were shown, deferrals identified, alarm history discrepancies documented. Frank's notebook was entered into the internal review. Richard's attorney questioned whether handwritten notes could be trusted. Frank sat straighter. Margaret looked at him. "Mr. Delgado, did you personally make these entries?" "Yes." "At the time of the events?" "Yes." Why? Frank looked toward Richard, then back to the board. "Because I knew the company records were not telling the whole truth." Richard's counsel interrupted. "Did you sign some of those records?" Frank swallowed. "Yes." "So you participated?" "Yes." The room went quiet. Frank continued. "That is why I kept the notebook." His voice shook. "I was scared to lose my pension." He looked down. "I am not proud of that," Margaret asked. "Were you ever instructed to sign work as complete when it was not?" Frank looked at Richard. "Yes," by whom Richard's attorney objected. Margaret lifted one hand. "This is an internal proceeding. He may answer." Frank's voice came quietly. "Mr. Hale." Richard stared at him. Frank looked away. Then came Ethan's testimony. His old credentials were questioned. Richard's counsel placed a copy of his expired engineering license on the screen. "You have not practiced as a licensed structural engineer for 3 years." "No." "You are currently employed as an operations supervisor." "Yes." "So you were not acting as the engineer of record." "No." "Yet you challenged signed maintenance reports." "I raised a safety concern, based on credentials you no longer maintain, based on photographs." The attorney paused. Ethan continued. "The outside engineers reached the same conclusion." Paul shifted slightly in his chair. The attorney changed direction. "Did Director Bennett encourage you to challenge the report?" "No." "Did she ask you to search for defects?" "No." "Did you discuss Crane 6 during your private dinner with her?" Claire's eyes moved toward Richard. There it was. Ethan did not look at her. "No." The room became still. Richard leaned toward his attorney, then spoke himself. "I think the board deserves context." Margaret looked at him. "What context?" Richard folded his hands. "Director Bennett had dinner alone with Mr. Walker last Friday. No one moved." He continued. "A romantic dinner." Claire's expression remained calm. "Mr. Hale," Margaret said, "what does that have to do with the maintenance record?" "It speaks to objectivity." Richard looked directly at Claire. Within days of that dinner, she initiated an engineering review based on his opinion-ordered operational delays and began an investigation targeting me. Claire waited. Richard kept speaking. People at the terminal noticed the attention she was giving him long before Friday. Ethan finally looked at Claire. Her face was unreadable. Richard continued. "I think it is fair to ask whether personal feelings influence professional decisions." Margaret turned toward Claire. Director Bennett. Claire placed both hands on the table. "Yes, I had dinner with Ethan Walker last Friday." She looked at every person in the room. It was a blind date arranged by my sister. A few expressions changed. Claire continued. "Neither Mr. Walker nor I knew the identity of the other person until we arrived." Richard leaned back. Claire looked at him. "On Monday morning we discussed the professional conflict. Before the technical review was completed, I disclosed the dinner to legal counsel." Margaret looked toward the company attorney. He nodded, confirmed. Claire continued. "I also removed myself from decisions involving Mr. Walker's compensation and performance evaluation." Richard said you did not remove yourself from the Crane review. "No." "Why not?" Because by then 2 independent engineers had reviewed the photographs." She slid Paul's report toward the center of the table. "This is their written finding." Margaret picked it up. Claire's voice remained even. The connector failed exactly where the concern was raised. She placed another document beside it. "These are the deferrals." Another. "These are the maintenance entries." Another. "This is the alarm discrepancy." Another. "This is your authorization for the final lift." Richard's face tightened. Claire looked at him. "My dinner has no relationship to the fracture surface of a steel connector." Silence. "It has no relationship to Frank Delgado's notebook." Another pause. "It has no relationship to an alarm being removed from the system." She pushed the authorization form farther across the table. "And it did not place your approval code on this lift." Margaret looked at Richard. "Did you authorize the lift?" Richard's attorney spoke. "My client has already stated that the equipment had not yet been formally removed from service." Margaret did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Richard. "I asked Mr. Hale." Richard's jaw moved. "Yes." After the engineering review had been ordered, yes. After concerns regarding possible structural fatigue were documented, they were preliminary. Margaret's face hardened. "That was not my question." Richard looked at the table. "Yes." Why? He inhaled slowly. "We were going to miss a contracted load window." Nobody spoke. Margaret looked at him for several seconds. Then she turned to the other board members. "We need a recess." Richard stood. Margaret lifted one hand. Mr. Hale remained outside the room. His face flushed. His attorney touched his arm. Richard looked at Claire, then Ethan. His expression carried anger, humiliation, and something close to disbelief, as if the problem had never been what he had done, only that the room had stopped accepting his explanation for it. He left. The door closed. Ethan looked down at his hands. They were steady, for the first time all week. 20 minutes later, Richard was informed that he was suspended pending completion of the compliance investigation. His system access was revoked. Security escorted him to retrieve personal belongings. No one celebrated. Frank sat in the hallway afterward with his elbows on his knees. Claire passed him. He stood quickly. "Director Bennett, sit, Frank." He remained standing. "Am I fired?" Claire looked at him. "I do not know yet." He nodded slowly. "That is fair." She studied him. "You cooperated, eventually." "Yes." Frank looked toward the closed boardroom. "I should have spoken 2 years ago." Claire said nothing. Frank rubbed his palms together. "I kept thinking retirement would make me brave." Claire looked at him carefully. Maybe bravery was walking into that room today. Frank gave a tired smile. "I would have preferred the pension." Claire almost smiled too. Inside the boardroom, Ethan was asked to return. Margaret Sloan sat with 2 other board members. Paul remained at the far end of the table. Claire stood near the windows. Ethan looked around. "Did I forget something?" Margaret gestured toward a chair. "Sit down, Mr. Walker." He sat. She opened a folder. "Rainier Harbor Logistics is beginning a structural review of lifting equipment at all Washington terminals." Ethan nodded. "That makes sense. We need someone who understands terminal operations and structural systems." Ethan's expression changed. Margaret continued. "Paul recommended you." Ethan looked toward him. Paul shrugged slightly. Margaret pushed a page across the table. "Regional Structural Safety Advisor." Ethan did not touch it. Claire watched him. He stared at the title. 3 years earlier, he had packed his engineering textbooks into boxes, stored his certificates in the garage, stopped renewing memberships, stopped answering calls from former colleagues. He had built a smaller professional life because smaller had felt safer. Margaret said it would begin as an interim appointment during the investigation. Ethan remained silent. "You do not need to answer immediately." He looked toward Claire. She did not nod, did not smile, did not tell him to take it. She simply looked back. His choice. Ethan appreciated that more than encouragement. "What would I be responsible for?" Margaret answered. "Equipment review, structural safety recommendations, independent escalation authority." Ethan looked down at the page. Independent from terminal operations. Yes. He thought about Rebecca. Not the accident, her at the kitchen table with a pencil between her teeth, her arguing over details nobody else cared about, her refusing to sign things she did not believe. Ethan touched the paper. "One condition." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "You are negotiating already, I am asking." "Go ahead. No anonymous safety recommendations." The room quieted. Ethan continued. "If someone raises a structural concern, their name stays attached to it. If someone rejects that concern, their name goes on the response." Margaret studied him. "Accountability, yes, even if people object, especially then." Paul nodded faintly. Margaret closed the folder. "That is reasonable." Ethan looked at the title again. Regional Structural Safety Advisor. The words frightened him. That mattered. He picked up the page. "I will do it." Claire looked down for a second. When she looked back, there was something warmer in her eyes. Not relief. Pride, maybe. Ethan stood. Outside the boardroom, Claire caught up with him near the elevators. Ethan. He turned. She stopped a few feet away. You did not have to say yes. I know. You could have taken more time. I know. She studied him. Are you sure? No. Claire almost smiled. That sounds more like you? He looked down at the folder in his hand. I spent 3 years trying to make sure nobody ever needed me for this again. Claire waited. I thought if I stopped being responsible for things that could fail, I would stop being afraid of failing people. Did it work? Ethan looked at her. No. The elevator doors opened. Neither stepped inside immediately. Claire looked toward the folder. What changed Ethan thought about Luis running clear of the crane, about Sophie's voice on the phone, about Rebecca telling him fear meant paying attention. He looked at Claire. I think I am tired of letting the worst day of my life choose every day after it. Claire said nothing. Ethan stepped into the elevator. She followed. The doors closed. For several floors, they stood beside each other without touching. Then Claire said quietly, Legal is going to restructure your reporting line. Ethan looked at her. Because of us. Because there cannot be an us if you report through me. He let the sentence settle. There cannot be an us if, not there cannot be an us. He looked forward again. Sounds complicated. Claire's mouth curved slightly. You knew that at table 9. I was hoping you had solved it by now. I have been busy with collapsing cranes, excuses. The elevator doors opened into the lobby. Claire stepped out. Ethan followed. Near the glass entrance, she stopped. People moved around them. Employees, security, visitors. Nobody paying attention. Claire looked at him. Go home. That sounded like an order. It was. I am not technically in your reporting line anymore. She raised one eyebrow. You have had the job for 4 minutes. I am adapting. Claire shook her head. Ethan smiled. A real smile this time. Not the one he used for Sophie. Not the polite one he gave coworkers. Something lighter. Claire saw it. He turned toward the doors. Outside, Seattle rain had begun again. Ethan stepped onto the sidewalk with the new folder under his arm and pulled out his phone. There was a message from Sophie. Molly says you have been in a meeting forever. Are you still alive? Ethan typed back. Still alive. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then good. Come home. Ethan looked through the glass behind him. Claire was still standing inside the lobby. Their eyes met. She lifted one hand. Not a wave exactly, just an acknowledgement. Ethan nodded. Then he walked into the rain. 3 weeks later, Ethan stood in his kitchen before sunrise with a new identification badge in his hand. Rainier Harbor Logistics, Regional Structural Safety Advisor. His photograph looked exactly the way company photographs always did. Tired eyes, neutral expression, a face caught between blinking and deciding not to. But the title beneath it still felt strange. Sophie sat at the kitchen table eating cereal. She looked at the badge. So you are an engineer again? Ethan leaned against the counter. Sort of. That means yes. It means the job uses engineering. Sophie took another spoonful. Like Mom. The words landed gently. That made them harder. Ethan looked toward the window. Morning rain traced thin lines down the glass. Yeah, he said. Like Mom. Sophie watched him. Are you scared Ethan could have lied? He had lied about smaller things before. Told her he was not tired when he was exhausted. Told her everything was fine when money had been tight. Told her not to worry when he had spent entire nights worrying for both of them. This felt different. A little. Sophie frowned. Only a little. He smiled. A lot. She nodded as if that answer made more sense. Mom got scared too. Ethan looked at her. She told you that. She said being brave was not the same as not being scared. He stared at his daughter. Rebecca had said that. Many times. Usually while arguing with someone who wanted a quicker answer than the safe one. Sophie returned to her cereal. Then she added, she said scared people pay attention. Ethan laughed softly. She really did talk a lot. Sophie smiled. You say that every time I remember something she said because it is true. Ethan clipped the badge to his jacket. For the first time in 3 years, an engineering title rested against his chest. He waited for the old panic. It came, then passed. He picked up his keys. Ready. Sophie grabbed her backpack. Can we get hot chocolate? It is 7 in the morning. That is not a no. Ethan shook his head. Get in the truck. At the terminal, things had changed. Crane 6 remained out of service while a complete structural repair plan moved through review. Every similar crane in the region had been inspected. 2 additional fatigue concerns had been discovered before they became serious. Frank had given 4 formal interviews. He had also stopped looking over his shoulder every time someone entered the maintenance shop. Richard Hale had not returned. The investigation found repeated maintenance deferrals, incomplete inspections, altered records, and pressure placed on staff to sign work that had not been completed. He was terminated. Parts of the case were referred outside the company for additional review. No one at the terminal celebrated. People simply worked differently, more carefully. Questions were written down now. Names stayed attached to concerns. Decisions had signatures. Ethan made sure of that. One Friday morning, Frank found him standing beneath a different crane with a tablet. You trying to ruin retirement for the rest of us? Ethan looked up. Your retirement starts in 4 months, 3 months and 22 days. You are counting hours now, considering minutes. Ethan smiled. Frank became quieter. They told me my pension is safe. Ethan lowered the tablet. That is good. Frank nodded. Cooperation mattered. So did the notebook. Frank looked toward the water. I still signed things I should not have signed. Yes. Frank glanced at Ethan. You never make anybody feel better, do you? Not on purpose. Frank laughed. Then the laughter faded. I kept thinking if I stayed quiet long enough, the problem would belong to somebody else. Ethan looked toward Crane 6. Problems do not care who owns them. Frank nodded. Rebecca teach you that? Ethan looked at him. Frank knew enough now. Most of the terminal did. Not everything. Enough. Yeah, Ethan said. Frank shoved both hands into his coat pockets. She sounds like she was something. She was. They stood there for a moment. Then Frank said, Do not use that in my retirement speech. I was not planning to give one. Frank stared at him. That might be worse. Across the region, Claire had become busier than ever. The board review cleared her decisions during the Crane 6 incident. Her disclosure to legal and decision to step away from Ethan's compensation review mattered. So did the fact that independent engineers had confirmed the safety issue before the failure. The company changed Ethan's reporting structure permanently. He now reported to a corporate safety group in Seattle. Claire had no authority over his pay, no control over his evaluations, no role in his promotions. The change was logical, necessary, and strangely terrifying, because it removed the easiest excuse they had left. For 2 weeks they barely saw each other outside meetings, not because either wanted distance, because both seemed uncertain what came after the distance was no longer required. Molly solved that problem. As usual, she did it without asking permission. She called Claire on a Sunday morning. Claire answered while pouring coffee. What? That is a terrible way to greet your sister. You only call this early when you want something. I read the local paper. Claire stopped pouring. Oh no, there is a story about the crane. Claire closed her eyes. Molly, it mentions Ethan Walker. Silence. Molly continued. Ethan Walker. Claire set the coffee pot down. Yes, the Ethan Walker from soccer. Yes, the Ethan Walker I sent you to dinner with. Yes, the Ethan Walker you have worked with for over a year. Claire leaned against the counter. Yes. Molly became completely silent. Claire waited. Finally, Molly said, You have got to be kidding me. You never told me his last name. You never told me where you actually spend 90% of your life. That is not the same thing. It is exactly the same thing. Molly, you knew him, professionally. You liked him. Claire said nothing. Molly gasped. Oh my God, please do not. You liked him before the date. I did not say that. You did not have to. Claire rubbed her forehead. Molly began laughing, not politely, not quietly. Claire waited for it to stop. It did not. You are enjoying this too much. I spent months trying to find someone decent for him. You barely know him. I know enough. Molly's voice softened. I know how he looks at Sophie. Claire did not answer. And I know how you sound right now. Claire looked toward the rain outside her kitchen window. How do I sound? Like someone who finally wants something she cannot turn into a quarterly target? Claire closed her eyes. You are unbearable. I am right. You being right is making it worse. That is usually how it works. The following weekend, Ethan took Sophie to Point Defiance Park. Claire met them near the waterfront. Ethan had spent the entire drive trying not to act nervous. Sophie noticed immediately. You are being weird. I am driving. You checked the mirror 6 times. There are cars behind us. There are always cars behind us. He looked at her. Sophie smiled. When they arrived, Claire was already waiting near a bench with 2 coffees and a hot chocolate. Sophie noticed the hot chocolate first. You remembered. Claire handed it to her. Your father said 7 in the morning was too early. It was. Claire looked at Ethan. He was wrong. Sophie nodded. I like her. Ethan nearly dropped his coffee. Claire laughed. They walked along the water. Sophie talked about school, soccer, a submarine design she was drawing. Claire did not speak to her like a child who needed entertaining. She asked questions. How deep would the submarine go? What would power it? How would people get out if something failed? Sophie answered seriously, then asked questions back. Eventually, they sat at a picnic table overlooking the bay. Sophie opened her sketchbook. She showed Claire pages filled with boats, underwater laboratories, and machines that looked impossible but somehow carefully considered. Claire studied each one. This is good. Sophie narrowed her eyes. Do not say that just because I am 10. Claire looked at her. I would never insult a 10-year-old engineer like that. Sophie smiled. Ethan watched them. A feeling moved through him that he did not have a name for. Not relief, not happiness exactly. Something softer, something he had stopped expecting. Before they left, Sophie tore 1 page from the sketchbook. A boat with 3 sails. She handed it to Claire. You can have this one. Claire took it carefully. Are you sure I made a better one? Ethan smiled. Claire placed the drawing between 2 pages of her notebook. Not folded, not rolled. Protected. Sophie watched her do it. That mattered. That night, Ethan sat on the edge of Sophie's bed while she arranged stuffed animals along the wall. She was quiet longer than usual. Then she asked Dad, Yeah, if you like Claire, does that mean you miss Mom less? Ethan stopped breathing for half a second. There it was. The question he had been afraid of without admitting it. He sat closer. No. Sophie looked at him. Then how does it work? Ethan thought about Rebecca, about Claire, about the strange belief he had carried that one kind of love could somehow erase another. I do not think loving somebody new takes anything away from somebody you already love. Sophie looked toward the photograph of Rebecca on her dresser. So Mom still stays. Ethan's throat tightened. Always. Sophie nodded slowly, then leaned against him. Ethan wrapped one arm around her. They sat like that for a while. No more questions. 2 weeks later, Ethan returned to the waterfront restaurant. Table 9 was available. He asked for it before he could overthink why. Claire arrived 5 minutes later. She saw the table, then looked at him. You did this on purpose. Ethan stood. Maybe. I hate surprises. I know. She sat. This time there was no awkward silence. No question about whether one of them should leave. No need to pretend the person across the table was a stranger. Claire rested one hand beside her water glass. Do you ever think about that first night, unfortunately? You almost ran. So did you. I was wearing better shoes. That would not have helped. Claire smiled. Outside, harbor lights reflected across the dark water. Ethan's phone buzzed. A message from Molly. Sophie is asleep. Finish dinner before you invent an emergency. Ethan showed Claire. She laughed. We created a monster. She was already a monster. Claire placed her hand flat on the table. The gesture reminded Ethan of the first dinner, only this time she left it there. Ethan looked at her hand, then at Claire. 3 years of grief had taught him how quickly life could disappear. For a long time he had mistaken that knowledge for a reason to stop reaching for anything. Now he understood something different. He placed his hand over hers. Claire turned her palm upward. Their fingers closed together. Steady. Simple. Real. She looked at him. You disappeared for a second. Ethan smiled. No. He squeezed her hand gently. I think I finally came back.